The oldest surviving member of the Galactic Council stood before the chamber, his voice trembling as he recited a text none of them had heard spoken in thousands of years. The Terran Codex flickered in the air as ancient glyphs rotated above the council table. Many members leaned back in their seats, exchanging bored glances, whispering about irrelevant myths and outdated lore. He ignored them and continued, explaining how an earlier civilization had encountered a species that fought with a level of ferocity and precision no known empire could understand. The archived records described humans as adaptable, resilient, dangerously creative, and disturbingly calm in the face of overwhelming odds. The Council had always dismissed the account as exaggeration from a primitive era, but the Elder insisted there was nothing mythical about what had been recorded. He paused and displayed the final glyph, a warning left behind by an extinct empire. It stated that if humans ever returned to the galactic stage, every species should approach them with caution and respect. A ripple of laughter echoed through the chamber at that line. One admiral scoffed openly, mocking the notion that an obscure, vanished species had ever posed a threat. Another representative questioned why they were wasting time on ancient predictions when there were border regions to exploit and resource clusters to expand into. Their arrogance made the historian tighten his grip on the holoslate as he explained that the ancient warning wasn't fearmongering. It was a survival note from a civilization that disappeared shortly after their encounter with humans. He was silenced by the council high speaker, who declared that the chamber had more pressing matters. Reports had arrived from outposts near the old quarantine zone. Vessels with unknown signatures had entered their territory. The speaker brushed it aside, calling it minor activity from smugglers or nomadic tribes. Yet the historian recognized the waveform patterns immediately. He had spent most of his life studying forgotten archives, decoding languages lost to time, piecing together fragments of extinct empires. Those signals matched the propulsion signatures described in the Codex, an eerie alignment that made his stomach twist. He tried to speak again, but the speaker moved the meeting forward with impatience. The war councils began discussing plans to harvest rare minerals from the quarantined region. Their voices grew bolder as they dismissed any need to verify the nature of the intruders. They were convinced no species advanced enough to challenge the council could have gone unnoticed for so long. They believed they already held supremacy over the galaxy. The historian listened, horrified, as they mapped out mining routes through the forbidden zone that had remained untouched not due to superstition, but because it commemorated a catastrophic battle few had survived to describe. When an aide rushed into the chamber announcing that one of the patrol fleets had made contact with a strange vessel, the council members paused only for a moment. The report described a silent ship of unfamiliar design, dark and angular, responding to hails with concise, polite messages. The tone disturbed the historian. He remembered the same descriptions from the ancient testimonies, a species that spoke with clarity and directness, revealing only what was necessary. Instead of reevaluating the situation, the speaker smirked and dismissed the patrol warning as an exaggeration by frightened officers. He accused them of overreacting to pirates. The chamber echoed with agreement. Every attempt by the historian to highlight the similarities to the Codex was met with disdain. His warnings sounded like desperation to their ears, a plea rooted in superstition rather than logic. Yet he could feel dread rising as he reviewed the old texts. The details aligned too perfectly: the propulsion pattern, the calm diplomacy, the sudden reappearance near the forbidden sector. He muttered to himself, barely audible, as he studied the patrol transcript: the humans had returned. He felt the weight of the Codex pressing on his thoughts like an unhealed wound reopened. He knew the Council's confidence masked an ignorance that bordered on suicidal. The ancient warning had not been poetic metaphor. It had not been fearmongering. It had been a final message from a civilization facing extinction, noting that humans were not conquerors nor aggressors. They were a force that shifted the balance of every conflict they entered. As the council rose from their seats, planning their next phase of resource expansion, the historian stood frozen in place. His hands trembled as he whispered the last line of the Codex to himself, a line the others had mocked earlier. They had no idea what was coming. They had no idea what they were provoking. They had no idea that they were repeating the mistakes of the Empire that left the warning behind. And now the prophecy was unfolding again. The diplomatic cruiser drifted toward the unidentified vessel with the casual confidence of a force that believed nothing in the region could challenge it. Council officers spoke briskly over comms, speculating about smugglers or experimental pirate ships, laughing as they prepared their standard intimidation routine. When the unknown vessel finally transmitted a response, the bridge fell silent. The voice that came through was calm, articulate, and unmistakably human. It introduced the ship as part of the Terran Expeditionary Network and stated, with firm courtesy, that the Council had entered a quarantine zone that must remain undisturbed for the safety of all species. The officers exchanged looks of confusion before the Admiral stepped forward, demanding identification. The human replied with exact registry details and calmly repeated the warning. Their tone held no fear, no hesitation, and no trace of aggression. The Council officers interpreted this professionalism as an attempt to bluff. The Admiral authorized a close scan, but the cruiser's systems struggled to penetrate the Terran hull. The readings flickered and vanished as though the ship's structure absorbed the sensors entirely. This anomaly irritated the Admiral, who ordered a boarding pod to be prepared. As the boarding team launched toward the Terran vessel, the human captain issued a direct statement. Unauthorized boarding attempts would be blocked to avoid unnecessary harm. The pod continued forward, and within seconds its engines sputtered out, its lights flickered, and its trajectory shifted. It drifted harmlessly away, caught in a controlled magnetic pull that placed it gently back toward the cruiser. There were no explosions, casualties, or displays of force, just flawless, surgical precision. The Admiral bristled, mistaking that measured restraint for incapacity. He ordered a warning shot, confident the Terran ship would retreat once faced with demonstrated power. The cruiser's forward cannons emitted a controlled burst. Before the energy even reached its target, the Terran ship's systems reacted with uncanny coordination. A faint ripple shimmered around its hull, and the entire energy blast fragmented and dissipated into scattered particles. The bridge crew stared in disbelief as their weapons logged no impact. The humans responded immediately. Their tone never changed. They reminded the Admiral that the region was sealed for a reason older than both civilizations, and trespassing would trigger measures neither side desired. The implication was not a threat but a responsibility. The Admiral dismissed it entirely, insisting that the Council dictated the rules within its borders. He demanded the humans power down and prepare for boarding inspection. The human captain declined and issued a final advisory. He spoke in a level tone that made several junior officers uneasy. He stated that the Council's actions risked activating dormant anomalies within the quarantine zone, anomalies the Terrans had fought once before at catastrophic cost. He asked them again, politely but firmly, to withdraw until a diplomatic negotiation channel could be established. The Admiral interpreted every word as insubordination. He ordered the fleet nearby to move into attack formation. Additional Council ships shifted into position, forming a semicircle around the lone Terran vessel. Officers on the bridge felt a thrill of superiority as they watched the numerical advantage grow. Their sensors tracked no countermeasures from the human ship. No weapons powered up. No shields flared. No evasive maneuvers began. It simply held position, silent and precise, as if analyzing every ship around it. The historian, reviewing the live data from his chamber, felt a chill settle through his chest. The Terran vessel wasn't stalling out of fear. It was calculating. Every movement from the Council fleet was likely being measured, categorized, and predicted. The Codex had described the same posture thousands of years earlier. Humans remained calm until a line was crossed. Then they reacted with a level of coordination that defied conventional tactics. On the cruiser bridge, the Admiral raised his hand to authorize full engagement. Before his voice could form the command, the Terran ship transmitted one final message. There was no anger, no trembling, no raised volume, only the steady firmness of a species that understood the cost of conflict better than those provoking it. Withdraw immediately. This is your last warning. The Admiral smirked, convinced he held absolute control of the situation. He gave the order to fire. He believed the humans had nothing left to offer. He would learn how catastrophically wrong that assumption was. War banners from dozens of Council species lit up across the galaxy as the High Speaker announced that humans had committed an act of defiance. The narrative spread instantly. A minor, unregistered species had blocked a lawful operation and dared to threaten a Council admiral. By the time the message reached the outer sectors, the story had already warped into claims that the Terran vessel had attacked first. Fleets began mobilizing before the historian could even finish requesting a pause for investigation. His warnings were buried under the excitement of a show of force. Commanders boasted that the conflict would last minutes, if not seconds, once their armadas arrived. Docking bays roared with activity as warships launched in tight formations. Crews cheered, confident in the Council's overwhelming numbers. Military broadcasts praised the swift decision to contain the Terran disturbance, portraying humans as a nuisance rather than a legitimate opponent. The historian watched in dismay as he reviewed the mobilization data, thousands of ships converging toward the quarantined region. The Terran Codex lay open on his console, displaying passages describing identical arrogance from the ancient empire that had fallen after ignoring the same signals. Despite everything, the Council refused to reconsider. Their analysts reported that the Terran ship displayed no detectable weapon systems, no conventional shielding, and no visible escorts. Representatives interpreted this absence as proof of primitive development rather than advanced engineering. They were too entrenched in their assumptions to consider that they were observing technology operating beyond Council understanding. While the fleets moved into formation, the historian tried once more to reach the High Speaker. He explained that the Codex recorded Terran tactics as nonlinear, adaptive, and deeply unpredictable. He stressed that the archived survivors described humans as unrelenting once provoked, not due to aggression, but because their combat doctrine focused entirely on ending threats with absolute finality. The speaker dismissed the warnings as ancient superstition and accused him of undermining morale. The first clusters of warships reached the engagement zone. Rows of cruisers, carriers, and dreadnoughts formed a vast crescent around the lone Terran vessel. Commanders traded jokes about capturing the human ship intact for museum display. Some discussed auctioning Terran survivors as curiosities. Their arrogance suffocated any chance of restraint. To them, the scenario resembled pest control, not war. Then a smaller Terran formation arrived, just a handful of vessels emerging silently from slip space. They positioned themselves with deliberate precision, neither fleeing nor attempting to surround the Council fleet. Several captains laughed at the sight, assuming the humans were attempting intimidation by bluffing with a token force. In their minds, the Council's firepower surpassed anything the Terrans could possibly deploy. The fleet commander prepared the standard demand for surrender, intending to broadcast it publicly to further humiliate the Terrans. Before the transmission could begin, the lead human ship broadcast a single line across all frequencies. The voice was steady, clear, and devoid of fear. It warned the Council that engaging within the quarantine perimeter would destabilize dormant anomalies. It urged immediate withdrawal for the safety of every species involved. The fleet commanders mocked the advisory, calling it theatrics. They locked weapons across thousands of vessels. The targeting grids lit up the surrounding void in a sea of red indicators pointing toward the small Terran formation. The historian recognized the pattern forming across the tactical hologram. He remembered the phrase from the Codex verbatim: humans never raised their voices when danger was imminent, they simply calculated, waited, and acted. He opened a secure channel, pleading with the fleet to stand down, but no one listened. The commanders were too committed to their narrative of dominance to consider stepping back. They believed the numbers guaranteed victory. They believed their authority was absolute. They believed the Terrans were alone, outmatched, and terrified. When the fleet commander issued the order to fire, the historian felt the cold certainty of prophecy locking into place. He knew what came next. The Codex had described it in painful detail. The Council had crossed the threshold that humans never allowed anyone to cross. The moment the weapons discharged, the war truly began. The first volley from the Council armada never reached its targets. A ripple spread across space as the Terran formation responded with a synchronized activation of systems no sensor array could classify. The energy beams fired by thousands of Council vessels fractured into harmless static, scattering like dust caught in a sudden storm. Command bridges across the fleet erupted in confusion as officers watched their full-strength barrage dissolve without leaving so much as a scorch mark on Terran hulls. The humans moved with chilling precision. Their vessels shifted formation in a seamless arc, not to evade but to position. Every Terran ship recalibrated in perfect unison, their movements measured to the millisecond. Council analysts attempted to track patterns, but the data returned nothing intelligible. No recognizable propulsion signatures, no heat spikes, no weapon identifiers. It looked less like technology and more like physics bending around a deeper understanding of the battlefield. A single Terran vessel fired first. There was no flash, no sound, no build-up. One Council dreadnought simply lost all power in an instant. Its lights dimmed, thrusters died, weapon systems shut down, and its massive frame drifted as though it had been unplugged from reality. Seconds later, 3 cruisers suffered identical collapses, their crews staring at blank screens as every system went dark. The strikes were selective, non-lethal, and absolute. Another wave followed, Terran drones emerging like shadows from beneath their ships. The drones were small, silent, and invisible to Council targeting grids. They swarmed through the fleet in flawless patterns, slicing through engines and weapon cores with microscalar pulses. Ships lost mobility one after another, drifting helplessly as alarms wailed. Yet no hulls ruptured. No crews died. The attacks dismantled capability while preserving lives, a level of restraint the Council had no doctrine to comprehend. Panic spread through the Armada. Commanders shouted contradictory orders as their fleets fell apart without understanding how. Some tried to retreat, only to find jump drives locked down by localized Terran interference fields. Others attempted close-range assaults, but their weapons refused to fire or misfired catastrophically. Terran interference didn't mimic jamming, it rewrote functionality. The historian watching from his chamber realized the terrible truth. The humans were not merely technologically superior. They were controlling the pace and outcome of the conflict at every level. Terran Marines deployed next. Their strike pods pierced the hulls of key Council flagships with surgical cuts, sealing behind them as though nothing had passed through. Boarders moved with unwavering calm, wearing exosuits that amplified their already formidable physical capabilities. They swept command decks with swift precision, disabling resistance without inflicting fatal injuries. Officers who expected brutality found themselves immobilized by stasis restraints before they could raise a weapon. Every captured flagship received the same message directly from the Terran commander: stand down and evacuate weapons control. Resistance would escalate the situation unnecessarily. The tone was steady, almost regretful, as though the humans viewed the entire battle as an avoidable burden. Within minutes, over half the Council fleet was completely disabled. The remaining ships drifted without engines or weapons, trapped in a formation that had transformed from an encirclement into a graveyard of pride. Council commanders begged for tactical analysis, but no one could explain what the Terrans were doing. Every hypothesis collapsed under contradictory data. They couldn't even identify the source of the disruption fields. It was warfare rewritten into a discipline beyond their comprehension. Messages from surviving crews grew frantic. Humans were everywhere, moving through corridors with silent precision, disabling corridors, securing officers, shutting down reactors with effortless familiarity. They didn't look victorious or enraged. They looked focused, efficient, and eerily calm. The historian watched the outcome unfold with a mixture of awe and dread. This was not vengeance. This was not conquest. This was a species fighting the only way it knew how once pushed into conflict, decisively, completely, and without hesitation. They aimed to end battles before they spiraled beyond control. By the time the last Council vessel surrendered control, the engagement had lasted barely an hour. The humans hadn't taken territory, hadn't demanded tribute, and hadn't executed a single enemy combatant. They had dismantled the largest armada in Council history with precision so overwhelming it left entire civilizations speechless. And through it all, the Terrans never once raised their voices. Council space lay silent in the aftermath of the impossible defeat. Hundreds of disabled warships drifted in controlled patterns as Terran vessels guided them into safe positions, preventing collisions and stabilizing life support across every captured hull. The surviving commanders braced for occupation, expecting demands for territory, resources, or political submission. Yet no such demands came. Instead, a single message was relayed across every deck, every corridor, every databank. Terran diplomats were en route to speak with the Council leadership directly. The tone carried no triumph. It sounded like a weary obligation. When the Terran delegation arrived at the Council capital, their ships approached without escort, broadcasting peaceful intent. Council defenses, still partially crippled, scrambled to form a perimeter, but the Terran vessels halted at a respectful distance. A shuttle descended to the central platform carrying only 3 humans. No guards. No soldiers. No intimidation display. They walked with calm purpose, unarmed, showing none of the hostility the Council had expected. The chamber that had once echoed with arrogance now sat in tense silence. The historian stood near the center, feeling the weight of every whisper from the ancient codex. When the Terrans stepped inside, the Council braced for accusation. Instead, the lead human bowed lightly and apologized for the conflict, stating it could have been avoided if their warning had been taken seriously. The High Speaker tried to regain dignity, demanding an explanation for the humans' claims about the quarantine region. The Terran representative projected a map of the area, revealing deep crimson anomalies pulsing beneath the void, remnants of an ancient threat that the Council had never detected. The humans explained that these anomalies were not natural. They were the dormant scars of a cosmic entity that had consumed entire sectors long before the Council's founders existed. The Terrans had fought it during their last known era, sacrificing countless lives to seal it behind gravitational distortions and quantum fields. The humans made it clear that the quarantine was never about territory. It was containment. Mining or destabilizing the region risked tearing open the remnants of the prison they had created ages ago. The Council's intrusion had already weakened 2 of the stabilizing layers, forcing the Terrans to intervene before the entity woke again. The battle, they explained, was not retaliation, it was prevention. Had they hesitated, the galaxy itself would have paid a price no war could compare to. The Council chamber rippled with shock. Everything they had assumed about humanity collapsed in an instant. The humans they had mocked were not an obscure species. They were veterans of catastrophes beyond anything the Council had faced. Their technology was not designed for conquest but for survival against threats that erased civilizations in hours. Their warnings had never been threats. They had been attempts to protect everyone. The historian stepped forward and asked why the Terrans had left the galaxy after the original conflict. The lead human answered with quiet exhaustion: humanity had retreated to rebuild and ensure the entity remained sealed. They had returned only because new disturbances suggested that the prison was weakening. The Council's mining operation had accelerated the instability. Had the Terrans come a decade later, the void might already have collapsed. The humans concluded their explanation with a single request: maintain the quarantine. No mining, no exploration, no interference. They offered to share sensor data proving the danger, promising collaboration once the threat was permanently neutralized. They demanded nothing else: no land, no sovereignty, no reparations. Their only priority was preventing a galactic extinction event. The High Speaker, stripped of his earlier arrogance, agreed immediately. The Council voted unanimously to uphold the quarantine and establish a cooperative observation network under Terran guidance. The historian watched as the Terrans prepared to leave, feeling a profound shift settling over the chamber. For the first time in thousands of years, the Council understood the warning left by the vanished Empire. Before departing, the lead human left a final statement: humanity sought peace, but peace required vigilance. Conflict had never been their goal. They fought only when forced, and when they did, they ensured the threat ended. As the Terran ships ascended into the sky, the historian rewritten the Codex's final line so future generations would understand the truth. They disregarded the ancient warning about humans, and paid the final price. Not in blood, but in the humbling realization that the protectors they provoked had been guarding the galaxy long before the Council learned to speak.